Well, obviously, Heavy Bones, back in the beginning when we got together, I was on the tail end of Cats and Boots. We had kind of just unceremoniously parted ways after a few really rough years of just constant touring. I don't mean rough like I'm complaining. I'm just talking like we just never stopped. We had a great time. And so we were having just far too good of a time, I guess. But we had really weak management. They were out spending the money before. Anyway, long story. There was a gap there, so when I came off the road for Cats and Boots, and I was, we were dissolving the band, I started putting together another band with a deal on the table from Warner Brothers. Started looking around town to put together a new band, and during that period of time, between that time and the time that we actually signed the contract and recorded the record, what came to be was a series of guys in and out of the band. At first, James Kotek was here, and then I called up Frankie, and he was our drummer, and looking all over, working with a lot of different guitarists, and Gary Hoey was living right down the street from me, and I found this guy, what rock has he been under? This is a phenomenal guitar player, and he knew all about music theory, and I was a road dog, you know what I mean? I was constantly touring in clubs since I was a teenager, to the venues and Cats and Boots all over, so it was really nice to meet somebody who had, a Berkeley, knew about music. It was refreshing. They decided to take in a real musical direction, and lo and behold, who better than a musical drummer that I could think of as my good friend Frankie. So called on Frankie, and thus the band began. We went on to write, through the course of putting the entire deal together, and the label just really wanted us to write a lot of songs. And so I brought the guys in the band, and we ended up, turns out we wrote close to 60 songs. And so, we're like, okay, well, we're going to pick the best songs out of the record. Well, that was a tough decision for everybody involved, the label, everything, because there were so many great songs. I mean, I knew at the time that we had enough music to do 2 or 3 records at least. And the band, just the writing, I mean, just putting the 4 of us, Gary and I and Frankie and Rex in a rehearsal room, it was like, it was so easy to write songs. We just started a groove and just had at it. So I ended up with this giant surplus of songs that were made on my recording machine in my apartment. And I was there, living up in the Hollywood Hills, and had wild roommates like Stephen Pierce, these other wild guys up there. It was really, really hard to get past the demo phase. So we moved our rehearsals up into studio up in North Hollywood that I had found when I was on Atlantic Records. It was an old machine shop, perfect for recording metal. There was oil metal chips on the floor. We cleaned it all up into a rehearsal room, for Cats and Boots and Mary Hoax. And so we went back to it for Heavy Bones, and we started recording. I grabbed my 8-track Tascam recording machine, and I moved it up to the rehearsal room, and we set up a couple of mics in the room, basically just to capture us recording the demos live. The reason I wanted to do that was because I'm used to just doing everything from the stage, and so to bring reality from the beginnings of those songs, which were made on the Tascam 388 in my apartment with Gary and I, and using a drum machine. It's a kiss of death to take the songs and go into the studio and record them and then go out on tour and beat them into shape, because then they're going to change. So, we got to beat these into shape before we record them. And since we're not on tour, we got to do it this way. So we took the majority of the songs that were initially written by Gary and I with a drum machine in my apartment. Those are going to be on volume 3. And they're basically just stereo 2 tracks from a little tape machine. So then we took the Tascam 388, which is a 1/4-inch tape machine, and we moved it up into the rehearsal room. Full volume, amps on 11. Frankie, we had to enclose Frankie in a plexiglass box so that our ears didn't bleed. I swear to God, it's just nothing shy of the truth right there. Yeah. He is an amazing and powerful drummer. So we put a couple of mics. We dropped one in the kick drum, and we put one over his head. And then we put just a mic on Gary's amp and a mic on Rex's bass. And then I sang the vocals. And then I was 5 tracks. We had 3 tracks left over to do overdubs. And so that's what we did. We mixed it down to 1/4-inch tape, and then we sent the songs over to the label, and the label picked the songs that they wanted and pretty much let them do it. It was a collaboration. So that's what I've got now. Is after all these years, after the bands broke up, I started getting phone calls from Dave Ponak over at Warner Brothers saying, Joel, why don't we release this Heavy Bones record? It's there was a lot of bad blood, I guess, in the past, mainly just between Gary and I, but we've mended ways, and we're good buddies again. God, what was it, like 20 years? I don't even want to count the years between. But Dave started calling and asking if I wanted to reissue the record, and I was like, no, I really don't want to do it. I don't want to relive that part of my life. And finally I said, I'll do it if I can have creative control and put some bonus tracks on there. I was going to dig up some of those old tapes. I was thinking, I wonder what they sound like. I haven't listened to them in all these years. Pulled them out, and it blew me away. So the process began, and I picked up an old machine out in Los Angeles, and I literally drove it because you can't ship them. I resurrected the tapes. I told him, I said, if I can have full creative control over this record, I'll do it. And Dave said, you got it. So it started with doing the reissue with bonus tracks. But then I got into the studio here. I found my engineering production partner, Mike, and he's got a great studio here in Cleveland. And it's like I tell people, it's a Class A studio. He built it himself. If you dropped it in the middle of Hollywood, nobody would miss a beat. It's that good. So we started working on it. Mike was like, growing up, I was a Frankie Banali fanatic. He said, this is a great project. And I said, why don't we, started listening to what songs we were going to put on the bonus track. And I decided, it hit me, I'm just going to do them all. Give them all to the fans. So that's what I did. And then Mike started working his magic on it. He backed himself into a real deep hole because he's so damn good at what he does. He's one of these Pro Tools wizards. And he started isolating every one of Frankie's single drum kick hits and all the guitars and the vocals, and cleaned up all the space and the stray ambient noise in the room and everything, and just cleaned it up so it sounded like a regular studio production instead of just 5 microphones hanging in the room with us rehearsing. And the playbacks blew me away. I was like, it sounds like a studio record. And so I said, all right, look, I want to just keep this really bare, no pun intended, very bare bones. And I want to just really just enhance exactly what is on tape. I don't want to change it, manipulate it, nothing. No auto-tune, none of this crap that bands are using today, processors, all that shit. I just want like the old analog days. I want this to be the real heavy bones. And all of a sudden, bing, there went the name of the project. And we added up the songs and figured we could divide these into 3 volumes and then do the reissue with some bonus tracks. So it all kind of came together. And the more we worked on it, the more we realized, this is a new studio album. These tracks, it doesn't matter when they're recorded, we're making a new record, so let's have at it. So we started to add, additional vocals, and I called Gary and, flew some tracks to him, and he added some guitar parts, and we pulled these old rehearsal demos that we did, and I converted it into a brand new studio album that's kicking my ass even.